Welcome to Grand Sumo Breakdown,
the unofficial sumo podcast
for official sumo fans.
Welcome to Grand Sumo Breakdown. This is Flerick.
This is Jake.
and this is Mac.
Unfortunately, we don't have Ryan here today. We told him to get on up, come on, but he was down with the sickness.
Well done. Good delivery.
Indeed. It was on my first time. Anyways, we have a special bonus episode here today about Americans in Sumo. Jake?
Yeah, I thought it was a great topic to cover. There have been a number of very influential and important sumo wrestlers from the United States. Most famously, of course, would be the two yokozuna from the United States. That would be Akebono and Musashimaru.
What about future yokozuna Waka Ichiro?
That's a good point. We're not going to cover any of those two or three, I guess, yokozuna today. I think those guys are worthy of a lot more time. Their own bonus episode here. But
Good man.
In lead up to those, which we'll do probably at a later date here, I thought it'd be worth covering all the guys who came before them, all the other Americans who kind of opened the door for them. And in particular, there's one absolute titan of sumo that basically started the whole thing. He's like the godfather of American sumo, the Lord of the Rings, if you will. Jaws.
This is a lot of good build-up.
I forgot.
The suspense is killing me.
I forgot the question quite a ways back here. What were we talking about? Americans in sumo.
Yes.
There we go.
Back on track. Flerick, you're supposed to be driving this bus.
Oh, no, Jake's got it.
Okay.
I stole that joke and I didn't deliver. I'm sorry. I could have done
Try
that
again.
better. Anyways, though, looking back at the history of Americans in sumo, there are a number of them in the first half of the 20th century. Not a whole lot of notable wrestlers, but there are a few. The very first guy I could find from America was Shoji Hiraga, who wrestled under the name Hiraga. He made it to Jonidan, but didn't wrestle for very long, only 1934 to 1938 or so. Didn't really have anything else on the guy. It's far enough back that we have Bansuke records, but really not a whole lot of personal information.
So it didn't rise very high then?
No, he only made it up to the second division, but he was the earliest guy I could find who had a history from the United States. A little bit more notable would be Toyo Nishiki. This was a guy born Harley Ozaki, half Japanese, born in Colorado. Not a very big guy. He was only like 6'2", 212 pounds. That's under 100 kilos. Pretty small guy. But, he had his roots, he had family roots in Japan. So it was, on the Bansuke, he's actually listed as from Fukuoka in Japan. Technically not, listed as from the United States, but he was born here, spent a lot of time growing up here.
But that was his mom. His mom was from Fukuoka?
I'm not positive on which side of his family, how much of his family, but he was the first guy from mainland United States that is verifiable on the absolute source, Wikipedia.
The most absolute sources.
Yes, I dug real deep for this information here.
How many rabbit holes did you have to climb out of before you got all of this?
Oh, man, many hours of rabbit holes, and I think I reached the bottom of this one. There's not a whole lot of stuff out there on these early guys, but Toyo Nishiki, he went over to Japan in January of 1938. He was introduced to sumo by a relative when he visited Japan. He didn't really know anything about sumo. And famously, he thought that the dohyo was made out of concrete originally.
Ooh.
Which would suck.
Ow.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, he joined sumo. He was obviously an athletic guy, though by today's standards, not huge. But he had a decent length of a career here. He wrestled from 1938 until 1945 when, there was kind of other stuff going on.
Nothing going on there.
Nothing else going on in Japan around 1945 or so, right? But despite being the second guy who I could find records of, he was technically the fifth Japanese American to go into sumo. I could only find one of the people before, meaning that there could only have been one before. I mean, Wikipedia wouldn't lie to me, right?
Never.
But he was the first the first American to reach Sekitori status. He reached Juryo in 1943, and then a year later he reached Makuuchi. He went 6-4 in his very first tournament in Makuuchi. Back then, they didn't necessarily have tournaments that were as long or even consistent with each other. But at that point, he was drafted into the Japanese army and never wrestled again. He did survive the war, though. I mean, I'm not saying that, but yeah, he didn't go back to sumo after the war. He still had his American citizenship when the war broke out, and he wanted to fight for the U.S., but he couldn't return to the U.S. I imagine there was probably a little bit of diplomatic difficulty with traveling between the countries.
Yeah, trying to find a boat that can go all that way.
Yeah, but at that time, he agreed to Japanese citizenship at the urging of the Sumo Association. Notably, that's kind of interesting that they have that kind of pull over their wrestlers. But he adopted a Japanese name instead of Harley. He was then Kiichiro Ozaki. But yeah, he did survive the war, but did not return to sumo, like I mentioned. But he thought after the war that he could make a better living as an interpreter for U.S. forces. So that's one of the things that he did as in the post-war time period. He regained his U.S. citizenship, though, just, something that I imagine that he wanted to do, keep his citizenship of the country that he grew up in. Spent the rest of his life running a ryokan in Tokyo with his wife, just like a roadside inn kind of quaint little motel.
Little bed and breakfast.
Yeah, and he lived all the way till 1998. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so 78 years old. But I think the coolest thing I found about this guy was he never had a single makikoshi. I think that's pretty notable. Yeah, I mean,
that's
back
amazing.
in this time, there weren't quite as many basho. This is the current system of 6 bashos of 15 matches. That wasn't established until like 50s, 60s-ish. So he only had 14 bashos in his career, which spanned about 7 years. So it's not as big a deal as it sounds as going 7 years without a single makikoshi, but it's still pretty cool.
That is cool.
I can't say I know of any wrestlers right now who have never had a makikoshi and have gotten all the way to makuuchi. There might be one or two up and comers, but I don't know.
I always think of Raiden at the top of my head.
Ooh, there
like
you go,
a 90% win rate.
Yeah.
So
he certainly didn't have a win rate that good, but he always had more wins than losses.
Indeed.
So
yeah.
Pretty cool guy, but like I said, he wrestled until 1945. Didn't return to wrestling after the war, so there was a pretty big gap here. There was about a 20-year gap before the next guy, the next American, joined sumo wrestling.
I just want to remember, you said this is the fifth American in sumo?
Yes.
But we only know of two of them. He's like the second one that we were able to find the information on.
Only the second one that I bothered to look up.
Okay.
No, it wasn't. I'm not saying it was entirely out of laziness. I'm sure there are primary sources in Japanese language that I could find, but for the purposes of this episode, Toyo Nishiki was the first notable guy.
Yeah. There could be another legendary American rikishi out there. We don't know.
I mean, if he was legendary, we'd probably know about it. That's kind of the definition
Okay,
of
mythic, plus mythical.
Mythical, yes. Right. George Washington. We don't know that he didn't sumo wrestle. Yeah.
That's right.
So the next guy that I wanted to cover is a name that a lot of people will probably know. This is Takamiyama. Takamiyama was, he started wrestling in 1964, like I said, about 20 years after Toyo Nishiki retired. And this guy is the Titan that I mentioned before. He's the guy that basically got every American that you've heard of this century who went into sumo wrestling is probably because of Takamiyama. So he's Hawaiian, just like pretty much every other American who went into sumo. But he was the very first foreigner ever to win a Yusho.
Wait, even before the Mongolians?
The Mongolians actually is a much more recent development than I realized. Yeah, it's mostly like 90s and 2000s. But Takamiyama was all the way back in the 60s. He wrestled for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 64 to 84. But this is like a generation or so before Mongolians got into it.
What rank did he win the Yusho at?
He actually won it as a Maegashira.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, he's a Maegashira 4.
Pulling the Tochinoshin.
No kidding.
Yeah, in his career, he made it up to Sekiwaki at one point. Actually, directly after winning that Yusho was enough to get him from Megashira 4 all the way up to Sekiwaki. But that was as high as he got. He didn't have consistency in his performance enough to get higher than that. Yeah, obviously, if you get up to Sekiwaki, you're pretty consistent. But when we're talking in terms of all-time legends, he didn't have the consistency to get up to Ozeki or Yokozuna. But one thing where he did have consistency was injuries. He was super, super healthy for the longest time. It's really
Oh,
cool. He
okay.
had-
Oh, you meant the other way.
I
he
thought you were
was
saying
consistent.
Oh, yeah, no, I was thinking
he was
with
really
you.
consistent in non-injury.
There you
Okay, okay.
Whatever. His injury status was very consistent, very consistently good. There we go.
Okay.
that is actually super impressive.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
That's
don't need to
amazing.
go through more ways to rephrase what I just misspoke, but he did have a number of longevity records as far as like consecutive matches without injury and whatnot. But yeah, he took only 3 years to get up to Sekitori, so he did have a pretty rapid rise. And yeah, like I said, he got to Maegashira ranking, and he won that Yusho in 1972. So he'd been wrestling for about 8 out of his 20 years. This was kind of like just before halfway through his career or so. From Maegashira 4, he got promoted all the way up to Sekiwake at that point.
Dang.
Another cool thing about that Yusho win, not only was he the first foreigner to win a Yusho, but there was a letter sent by President Nixon at the time, and it was the first time that English was officially spoken on the dohyo was during his celebration, the ceremony for when he won the Yusho.
Cool.
They're giving him the whatever they did at the time instead of the macaroon or the fish or whatever. They're
The Emperor's
giving
Cup,
him,
though?
Well, I mean, that's always been there.
Just making sure.
But yeah, like among the other prizes and things, they read English on the dohyo for the first time in an official capacity. I mean, maybe one of these guys like swore in English when he lost, but in an official capacity.
Yep.
Yeah, darn.
Oh, shucks.
But in an official capacity, President Nixon's letter was the first time that English had been officially spoken on the dohyo.
That's a big deal.
Yep. So this guy's like I said, he's from Hawaii. His real name was, he's still alive. His real name is Jesse Kuhalua. I'm probably butchering that, but he's not the first Hawaiian name that I'm probably going to butcher today. But yeah, so he was born in 1944, started wrestling when he was 20. And he tried to wrestle all the way till when he was 40, but couldn't quite get there. By the early 80s here, he was finally starting to get those injuries that most people get much earlier in their careers, but eventually, yeah, he just couldn't do it. Rather than dropping down to Makushita, he decided to retire. Another basho or two, and he could have made it to 40, which was one of his goals, but wasn't worth it at that point. He was just too injured. Right around that time that he retired, though, his stable also recruited another American, and that other American surpassed even Takamiyama. Takamiyama was obviously instrumental in training and starting
The pioneer.
starting this culture of sumo wrestling in America. But the people that he helped bring into the sport, including this next guy we're going to talk about, really, really surpassed him and brought sumo wrestling to a wider audience and to a wider talent pool, basically, because the more people that know about a sport and are interested in the sport, the higher the competition is going to get. A rising tide raises all boats kind of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
So by opening this bigger talent pool of all these massive Hawaiian people, he was able to bring in both the wrestlers that we're going to talk about and some that we aren't going to cover today, like Akebono.
So you're talking about massive Hawaiian guys. Like, how big are we talking about?
Yeah, that was kind of curious with that. How big is Takamiyama?
Takamiyama at the time was one of the absolute biggest. He was 6'3", which is 190 centimeters. Which even today, that's still pretty tall, but it's not it's not as tall as the tallest guys.
That's
out
around
there.
Hakuho height, right?
I'm comparing him to Ichinojo. So is he Ichinojo size?
mountain?
Pretty close. He at his peak hit 204 kilos.
Oh man,
That's 450 pounds. Yeah, that's bordering on Ichinojo
Whoa.
size, but not quite there.
yikes.
Yeah, so he was recognizable not only for his size, but he also had these hilariously gigantic sideburns, and he wrestled in a bright orange mawashi. So yeah, I mean he was
Hold on.
famous. A lot of people, you go ahead and look up a picture. It's awesome.
I have to.
But yeah, he was recognizable to everybody in Japan. He was in commercials and junk. It was he was a big deal. But right before he retired, right before he retired from wrestling, because he went into coaching afterwards. But right before he retired from wrestling,
Holy cow.
sounds like Mac just found some sideburns.
Now those are some sideburns.
Yeah.
We'll tweet out a picture when this comes out. It's a sight to
Wow.
see.
It is a sight to see. We'll get some Takamiyama pictures and pictures of this next guy who he helped bring in and helped train for the first couple years that he was there. This next guy we're going to talk about is Konishiki. Konishiki is another name that a lot of longtime sumo fans will know. Konishiki was probably his biggest claim to fame is that he was almost the first foreign yokozuna.
Oh, wow.
Almost?
Almost. He didn't make it, but he was the first one where it was actually, put to the council, put to a debate about whether or not he should be one. So, starting on Konishiki here, the size discussion that we had before, it's going to get weird. Konishiki was only 6 foot and half an inch tall. That's 184 centimeters. That's not particularly tall, right? I mean, it's probably larger than an average-sized Japanese man at the time, but it's not super tall. But he weighed over 600 pounds at his peak.
Wow.
Yeah. Konishiki's highest highest official sumo organization weigh-in was 287 kilograms.
My goodness.
So,
Holy smokes.
630 pounds. That is only a couple pounds less than the entire GSB crew.
Wow.
And he weighed as much as Arawashi with Chiyoshoma on his shoulders. And Chiyoshoma is also holding a 15-pound weight in each hand. So, yeah, he was hard to mistake for anyone else. We'll say that. It was it's not hard to tell whether or not that guy is Konishiki. Yeah, so like I said, though, Konishiki, he entered wrestling right before Takamiyama retired. He started wrestling in 1982. He was about 20 years old or so, and he wrestled all the way until 1997. So 15 years is pretty good for somebody that size, considering the state of sumo wrestler knees at basically any given point in time here.
If Ikio is any indication, tape. Lots and lots of tape.
Lots of tape. But yeah, due to his size, by the time that he got to the Makuuchi ranks, he was very recognizable. Like I said, very famous. He was popular because he was kind of he's kind of a lighthearted, fun guy. But he actually almost didn't go into sumo because he was a very promising student. He had a lot of potential as a musician or as a lawyer. But he also regarded Takamiyama as a local hero. So he tried out sumo. Takamiyama obviously had a hand in that, and he went to the same stable as Takamiyama. That's the stable Takasago-beya. And due to his enormous potential, he was named Konishiki. He was actually the 6th guy to take this name, and one of those guys before him was a yokozuna from the same stable. So yeah, it's a pretty prestigious name to take on, and he lived up to it, that is for sure. He just absolutely rocketed up the rankings. He made Sekitori within 8 basho.
Dang.
Wow.
Yeah. So he made it to Juryo. He had a playoff for the win, a Makikoshi, and then 2 straight Yushos. So
Whoa.
in those four Juryo bashos, he just rocketed straight to Makuuchi.
Okay, we're talking about Juryo Yushos. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, still,
sorry,
it doesn't matter.
that.
Yusho's a Yusho, man.
It's
Yusho's a
still
Yusho. Well, in
Okay, all right.
Juryo-
Juryo.
It's still
Yushos
impressive.
are still good.
It's still very impressive.
Absolutely. Like that's so far beyond what most people can ever hope to achieve in their career that that's certainly nothing to scoff at, but it gets better. When he made it to Makuuchi, he got a Jun Yusho in his 2nd basho. So yeah, he was one of those
impressive.
guys. Yeah, he's one of those guys like
Wow.
Onosho, Asanoyama these days. They get to Makuuchi and immediately make a splash. Yeah, he was one of those like top caliber prospect and everything. He did have some injuries pretty soon right after that, but within 5 years of his debut, he had made Ozeki.
Jeez.
Yeah, pretty ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, he did have his occasional injuries. He's obviously far bigger than even Takamiyama, so those knees start to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not just that. With his size, I mean, I'm thinking more in line with a lot of the heavier wrestlers that we see now. Was he a pusher thruster? Was he?
Oh yes.
Okay, I had a feeling.
Yeah. No, that's a theme that you'll see a lot when you look at Americans in sumo. Is that pushing and thrusting is it's not like a lesser version, but it's something that doesn't require as much experience and and technical training. It's something that if you are just a larger, stronger athlete with more reach, pushing and thrusting is what comes naturally to you. Guys like Abi right now, he's got great reach, and he's a just superb athlete. And those are things that lend themselves to pushing and thrusting. And that's a theme in Americans who went into sumo, is at the very least they start out with pushing and thrusting as their far, far superior technique compared to grappling.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because of the size, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The reach and also the weight. It's harder to push somebody around. It's harder to grapple them when they weigh twice as much as you. So yeah, that was definitely how he made his hay. He pushed guys back, and but if you could sidestep him, if you could get around to the side, to the back, you could push him. So it's kind of a balance. It's one of those things like
don't miss.
Yeah, exactly. You'll see some of the bigger guys even today is the issue with big guys is that they're great against guys that are also big because they're better in an even fight. Mm-hmm. But when guys are much faster than them and can get around, that's kind of a poor matchup for them.
We've seen that with Aoyama.
Sure, yeah, like Aoyama, he is more likely to win against another huge guy like Gagamaru or somebody than he is likely to win against Arawashi or Ishiura or somebody that can like dodge his thrusting and get to the side or get to the back. Mm-hmm. This was exactly the problem with Konishiki. However, he was also really, really, really good, so it was very hard to do that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I said, he got to Ozeki very quickly, and he spent 6.5 years up there.
As an Ozeki.
As an Ozeki, yeah.
Holy cow.
So there were some ups and downs, but he maintained his rank, and he actually won his first Yusho in 1989. He was the second foreigner to ever win a Yusho after Takamiyama, of course. And a year later, at the end of 1991 and the beginning of 1992, he won 2 more.
In a row?
Not in a row, but he was able to get to the point where it was debatable, should we make him a yokozuna? He had 2 Yusho within 3 bashos. But in that span, there were also other yokozuna who were injured. So the Liberation Council wanted to wait 1 more basho, just like, it's not a done deal. If he had won 2 in a row, this would be a different conversation. But he won 2 out of 3. Let's see how he does in this next one.
Yeah, and what was his middle basho score?
I'll bring that up, but it was not. It wasn't quite as good. It was a 12-3, but it was not even a Jun Yusho. So it was
12-3, still respectable.
Yeah. Still very respectable, of course. But
in the Hakuho era, if you beat Hakuho on that'll get you a Yokozuna.
Oh, absolutely,
promotion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, but at the time there wasn't a figure on the level of Hakuho because obviously there never has been ever. But you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But here is where the controversy with Konishiki comes up. After that second win in 3 basho, there was a lot of political issues, we'll say. So one committee member, one of the Yokozuna Deliberation Council members, said that Konishiki had no hinkaku. That is the term for essentially like dignity or grace.
Right.
That it's one of the requirements to be a yokozuna is you need performance in the ring and you need hinkaku. And a member saying that he had no hinkaku at the same time that newspapers were saying things like, we don't need a foreign yokozuna.
Ooh.
Yeah, it gets a little dicey. And also, at the time, due to trade issues, Japan and the U.S. were not getting along super great. So there were a lot of factors that go into this. And probably the number one thing that happened, the most important individual event, the New York Times published a story saying that Konishiki said, if I were Japanese, I'd be yokozuna already.
Oh, dang.
Not good.
Right. So he didn't necessarily deny or confirm that he said that, but he did shortly afterwards have a tearful press conference apologizing for, any issues that he has caused, any extra drama. All this media distraction, though, it added up to his following basho being a 9-6. And he was never in the yokozuna discussion again. But he did stay as an ozeki, for a good amount of time, just because he was superbly talented.
I'm kind of surprised Takamiyama didn't step up to help him, because he was his Oyakata, right?
No, not at that time. He was Takamiyama was another wrestler from the same stable, but had retired at that point, and I'm not positive exactly where he was coaching in this in this interim. But either way, Konishiki, there was definitely a media component to his not being promoted, but there was also the fact that his injuries and his weight were increasing, and that was definitely his peak. He was on the downfall from there on. So this was, like I said, the beginning of 1992 where this is all going on. A year later, he loses his Ozeki rank, but weirdly enough, he got more popular culturally just because he'd been around. He was an interesting character. But even as his sumo career waned, his celebrity status was waxing. So it was kind of a contradiction, but he was definitely somebody who was in the media. He was a very popular guy. Before getting demoted to Juryo, he decided to retire. He had a lot of knee trouble specifically. He also had a lot of issues due to his weight, like gout. He had ulcers, whatever. Lots of things that build up when you get to be in your 30s and you weigh 600 pounds. Well, such a relatable situation.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. But either way, since then, he's always been a popular figure in Japan. He actually these days goes by Konishiki, but in Romanized letters as opposed to in kanji, which technically is okay for him to go by that name now. Normally, when you leave sumo, your sumo name is it's like a stage name that you can't really take with you, other than special circumstances. But either way, he still goes by Konishiki, written in Romanized letters, and he does all sorts of celebrity stuff. He hosts. He's like a reality show host, commercial guy, appearances on kids shows, charities, minor film appearances, and he also plays the ukulele and has had a number of popular songs.
What film is he in?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head here, but he's definitely somebody who's made the rounds, we'll say.
Yeah. I know he was in the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift.
That's the one, yes, in the bathhouse scene.
That was him?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
The huge guy just kind of threw
the guy out.
And
wow,
that was in 2006.
He's still huge.
Yeah, 2006, so 9 years after he had retired. He still was that big and was that intimidating.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But also right around the time that Konishiki was a big deal, Takamiyama comes back into the picture. Takamiyama was actually likely more effective as a coach than he ever was as a wrestler.
You said he was the Titan, though.
Yeah, I mean, well, Titan in that he got everything going for United States wrestlers. He recruited a lot of really, really powerful, important wrestlers. Obviously, he had his hand in bringing up Konishiki, but his pride and joy, of course, would be after starting his stable, he recruited Akebono, who obviously became a yokozuna. Oh. We'll cover a lot more details in that later, but Takamiyama, after he retired, he was the, again, first foreigner to do something, as, certainly not the first time that's come up, but he was the first foreigner to start his own sumo stable. He started Azuma Zeki Beya and recruited a lot of other Americans. He, obviously, like I said, Akebono is the star of the show, but he had a number of other guys that he brought in or guys that he inspired and whatnot. Akebono and slightly later than Akebono's younger brother were both recruited to his stable. Akebono's younger brother, who was named George Rowan, I don't know why I keep doing that. None of these guys are dead.
But their career is past tense. I can see that.
Yeah, this is way back in the 90s.
Akebono's younger brother,
Tom's dead.
Yeah, his younger brother George started with the Shikona Taikai, the same name that Akebono started as before he got the name Akebono.
Oh, cool.
But he only had one basho. In 1989, he went 1-6 and he dropped off. But
sumo is not for everybody.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm sure there are a lot more stories like that than there are stories like Akebono. But along with that pair of brothers came another pair of brothers. There was Yamato and Onami, who were they're friends of Akebono and his family. Yamato, real name George Kalima, also came from Hawaii. He grew up with Akebono. And the two of them went over to sumo. They went over together, but they didn't join the same stables. Yamato and his brother joined Magaki Beya. And Yamato wrestled from around 1990 to 1998. He was, like most of these guys, pretty huge. He topped out at 191 kilos. That's 420 pounds. And he got a Yusho in Jonakuchi, and probably his other most important feat, he beat Takanohana, noted fanny pack enthusiast,
And scarf wear.
in training.
Oh.
Okay.
Not in an official match.
But he beat him 8 times in a row in training.
My goodness.
Yeah, take that, fanny packs.
This is when the scarves came in, right? So the fanny packs were in, then the scarves came in.
It must have been. Takanohana, at that point, his fashion sense completely stratified, and he's been wearing fanny packs ever since.
I knew it.
But no, Yamato, he made it to Juryo in 1995. He kind of went up and down for a year or two. And he spent 7 bashos in the Makuuchi division, including 1 kachikoshi, which, when we're talking about guys, long-term in context of legends, that's not a big deal. But compared to like the majority of sumo wrestlers, that's a big deal. That getting a kachikoshi in the Makuuchi division is huge. That was, spectacular wrestler here. Yamato, though, towards the end of his career, had like an almost hilariously bad run of luck. He had life-threatening pneumonia that took him out in March of 1998, and then he tried to come back but wasn't fully recovered, and he went 1-14.
This is Terunofuji level here.
Yeah.
Terunofuji level, and then he was hit by a car. He lived. He was okay, but it meant more time off, and he came back after being demoted down to Makushita. He did okay, but rather than work all the way back up, that's when he had to call it quits.
I think we have a new level of bad luck.
Yeah,
that's pretty bad.
The Terunofuji and Yamato scale.
Wow.
Terunofuji's pretty bad, too, though.
Well, no,
I will say.
not to discredit him, but he didn't get hit by a car.
That's true, but he also had like ammonia and like diabetes at the same time.
That's true.
And both his knees need surgery.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right.
They're certainly in the same order of magnitude of hilariously terrible luck.
Wow.
Another guy that was recruited by noted titan of sumo Takamiyama was Takamikuni. Takamikuni was born Taylor Wiley and is also professionally sometimes goes by Tila Tuli. And if you're a UFC fan, you recognize that name. Takamikuni, as I'm speaking to 2 non-UFC fans.
Truth.
We'll get there though. It's kind of awesome. But Takamikuni was recruited into Takamiyama's Azumazeki stable, and he started his career with 14 straight wins, lots of promise, and he was an early mentor to Akebono when Akebono joined sumo. But he was only in pro sumo for about 2 years, from 1987 to 89. He made it up to Makushita, but again, knee issues was the thing. So
seems to be a common theme here.
Yeah, and not only among these enormous Americans, but just in sumo in general. It's just the worst joint, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, when you're very top heavy, as most of these guys are, the knees take a lot of punishment.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, so he left, but he had a couple other very, very notable things that he did since then. Since then, he joined the UFC for the very, very first tournament, UFC 1. If you watch UFC these days, it's fighter against fighter. It's guys duking it out, but not necessarily complete styles clashing. If you go back to UFC 1, what they did was they picked a bunch of different disciplines of fighting. So they had a boxer, they had a Brazilian jiu-jitsu artist, and they had a sumo wrestler.
This sounds horribly mismatched.
They had a sumo wrestler, Tila Tuli, and he got kicked in the head.
He got a kickboxer?
He got a kickboxer, Gerard Gordeau, who was the eventual runner-up in UFC 1. This, by the way, is in 1993 or so.
Okay.
But in the opening match, he came out and didn't know how to strike, as you could imagine sumo wrestlers might be.
It's not pushing and thrusting.
Oh man, it was. If you have the chance, if you have the method to do it, go take a look. Not just because early UFCs are hilariously weird in their own sense, but it's the first of many, as we will see, opportunities for sumo wrestlers to embarrass themselves in other sports. Yeah, MMA is not where sumo wrestlers should go if they want to make the most of their athletic talents.
Yeah, it just has such a different rule set, doesn't it? Because like you're like you say, you're not trained to do any strikes or any kind of kicks.
Striking
like
in particular, yeah. Like if you're in a situation where you're trying to knock the guy to the ground, striking is not necessarily the number one thing you would go for if you got 200-300 pound guys, but there are a lot of forms of striking that are legal in sumo. It's just
anything open hand.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, but you don't have to defend against a left hook. You don't have like a left foot or right foot forward stance where the strategy is completely different depending on your opponent. It's all, charge and grapple. But when you can kick the other guy in the head,
that kind of changes things.
Sumo doesn't really prepare you for that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that it's an important moment in UFC history and certainly an important moment in Taka Mikuni's history. But he has also stuck around, and in the more recent times, he's done some minor acting roles. You remember the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall?
Yes.
When he's in Hawaii, he has several friends that he makes around the hotel, and one of them is a massive Hawaiian guy, Tila Tuli.
Oh, cool.
Also, the new reboot of Hawaii 5-0 in the last couple of years, one of the main characters is Kame Kona, Tila Tuli. There you go. So he's made a name for himself as an actor, as well as a head kick receiver and sumo wrestler.
Wow.
Okay, I need to find that. I want to see how bad this head kick was.
We can show you. It's not the worst knockout I've ever seen, but it's not.
It's the idea that a sumo wrestler gets knocked cold.
Not good. Speaking of sumo wrestlers who get knocked out cold, the last guy that I want to cover today is Henry Armstrong Miller, who, besides having like the most badass name ever, also had one of the more badass shikonas ever. The shikona being the sumo ring name. He went by Sentoryu, which means fighting war dragon.
Holy cow!
Yeah, right. So like super overly badass. He's pretty cool. He is the only African American to ever make it to Makuuchi. Yeah. He was half. He's totally still. He's not.
We get it. We get it, Jake.
He's not even 50. But no, his mother is Japanese and his father's African American. He was born in Japan, so he had Japanese citizenship from the beginning. But most of his life he spent in St. Louis suburbs where he grew up. And St. Louis is actually kind of his namesake. Not only does his shikona mean something badass, but it's kind of a Japanese version of St. Louis is Sentoryu. It's kind of a version of St. Louis saying it in a very Japanese way. So kind of a play on words for his name. Another cool name fact for Sentoryu: his middle name Armstrong comes from the fact that he was born on the day that Apollo 11 launched in 1969.
Oh, cool!
Apollo 11 being the first time that man set foot on the moon by Armstrong, hence the name. So
I like it. This guy's
a fun fact machine. You want another one?
Oh yeah.
You said he get knocked. You said speaking of knocked.
Oh
cold,
no. We'll get to that.
Okay.
We've got some sumo fun facts before we get to concussion fun facts.
All right, let's get the good stuff then.
So yeah, not only did he make it all the way up to Makuuchi, but he has a 1-0 record against Asa Shoryu, one of the greatest yokozuna of all time.
Dang.
The two of them met one time in Juryo, and Sentoryu came out on top.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But yeah, Sentoryu, he had a pretty reasonably long career too. He started in mid 1988 and he wrestled all the way up until 2003. Another sumo fun fact: he retired the exact same tournament as American yokozuna Musashimaru. So, like I said, he's a fun fact machine.
That's awesome.
He's like my favorite. I am all about fun facts. But yeah, he made Sekitori a number of times. Right at the end of the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s is when he hit his peak. He got up to Makuuchi 3 times, one of which was a Kachikoshi, but most of that time that he was a Sekitori, he spent in Juryo. He did have a lot of injuries, as happens. Dropped down to Makushita here and there, but he was the 5th oldest wrestler to ever get back to Sekitori when he was 34 years old. But the injuries piled up, and like I said, retired 2003.
So I'm trying to think of him in respect to Aminishiki. So Aminishiki is definitely one of the older ones. Would you compare him and say that?
Amanishiki, I believe, has the record, or at least he's in the conversation for the oldest one to return to Makuuchi. Centaurio in particular he does have the record outright.
Yep. Every time he comes back to Makuuchi, he breaks the record.
And I'm sure he'll set his own record a few more times, won't he? But Centaurio, his record was to return to Sekitori. So he was down in Makushita at 34 and made it back to Juryo. That was the transition where he was one of the oldest.
Gotcha.
That's almost even more impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it is. That's a big step. That's one of the steps that people will fight tooth and nail for, and
because you're competing with everybody.
For.
I mean, you've got 50 guys that you're going against now.
So yeah, the big deal with Centaurio, though, the reason I brought up concussions, and man, that's not really a topic we should make light of, is it?
No.
But he's had his fair share since, because he retired in 2003 from sumo wrestling. But he did not retire from combat sports in general. The year after he retired from sumo, he started in MMA, not learning the lesson that Taka Mikuni had taught beforehand. So he went into MMA, and he like almost fought until now. Like it's only a couple years ago that he actually had his last fight.
That's impressive.
Has he maintained his size?
Well, I mean, he was never supremely tall. He was only 5'9". At his peak, he was only 136 kilos. So he was much more in the mold of like a Arawashi Chiyoshima, like that kind of very small, very very low on the range of normal size. You know what I mean? So like he was never huge, but he's been a lifelong athlete. So he's put together a ton of athletic accomplishments compared to the average person, but compared to the average mixed martial artist, not so much. He's had, like I said, a handful of concussions. He has gone 6-16 in his professional career, and I was kind of in the background looking it up. It was only in 2013 that he had his last fight. So he was 38, 5 years ago, 43 by the time that he had his last fight, where, as was the theme in his mixed martial arts career, he got knocked out. A number of concussions. Almost all of his losses were TKO or KO.
That's not good.
No, not good at all.
It's not good. But I mean, it's still notable because he was able to. I think what I'm most impressed with was his ability to maintain his athleticism to the degree to make a living much later into his life than a lot of people are able to. But in his MMA career, he did face and lose to some notable names. James Colossus Thompson, Zulu Zinho, kind of deep cuts, but they're names that have been around in mixed martial arts for a while. And the Wikipedia test is something that you can apply to mixed martial arts. How many guys have you beaten that have their own Wikipedia page is a great way to determine how good somebody is at MMA. And on that scale, Centaurio is a 1. One guy that he beat has a Wikipedia page out of the 6, which
impressive.
is, I mean,
it's something.
It's certainly more impressive than like my mixed martial arts record. Technically, I'm undefeated, but I have not beat a single man with a Wikipedia page. He also did kickboxing here and there. In the early 2000s, K1 kickboxing was a pretty big deal, especially in Japan. It was, it was a spectacle kind of a thing. And in the first ever kickboxing fight between former Sekitori, he faced Wakashoyo, a former Sekiwaki, who is actually somebody Centaurio blamed for injuring him in Centaurio's Juryo debut.
Dang. So that's like a grudge match right there.
It is a grudge match.
I like it. I like it.
And this...
how'd that match go?
Yeah.
Centaurio, first round knockout, win. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Probably,
happy ending. Happy ending.
Did he kick him in the face?
It was a TKO. Let's look up, see if it says the method. Wakashoyu, it does not say by the method. But he knocked him down 3 times in the first round. And
Jeez.
3 knockdowns in a round is generally a TKO. The fight is over. That's kind of the rule of thumb for boxing, for kickboxing, etc. Mm-hmm. So there you go. In kickboxing, even though he only had 3 matches and only won 1 of them, he beat a guy with his own Wikipedia page. So there you go. That's something. That's certainly, like I said, a little bit better than my kickboxing record. So I can't talk too much. So obviously these are the Americans in sumo who are not they're not the absolute best, but they're ones that are worth talking about because they open the door for the two guys who are the most famous and the current generation. So Takamiyama being the first American and first foreigner to win a Yusho and to open his own stable, he brought in Akebono. He brought in a lot of the influence, even guys who didn't go directly to his Azumazaki stable. He spread the word. He spread the influence, and he brought in all this new talent, all of this new interest in the sport.
Is Waka Ichiro in the Azumazaki?
No. Waka Ichiro actually... I'll get to that in a second here, but the Takamiyama, last thing on him, when you are in the Sumo Association, you do have a mandatory retirement age, and he just hit his in 2009. He was training people from the 80s until 2009.
Wow.
When he finally retired, he had a massive party. Thousands of people showed up for his retirement party. Akebono, Konishiki, and it wasn't on the dohyo, but he got a second letter from a president. He got a letter from President Obama and officially sanctioned praise from Congress. Like it was read on the floor of Congress
Wow.
for his retirement that Congress officially honors Takamiyama, Jesse Kuhalua, for his contribution to sumo, to sport, to Hawaii, etc.
That's awesome.
That's
Pretty big deal.
impressive, but I'm
Yeah.
also kind of funny. There's a thing like officially sanctioned praise.
Congress
Yeah,
officially sanctioned.
It's basically like as boring C-SPAN kind of programming as you can imagine, but it's somebody. It was I saw the video of it. It's a congresswoman from Hawaii, I believe it was. Obviously Hawaii, but I can't remember which Congress member, whatever. But yeah, this person read out like we officially want to recognize this man's contribution. And, there's a vote. Aye. Yes, of
Everyone
course,
said
because he's freaking awesome.
I was going to say, everyone said sure.
Yeah, sure, go for it. But yeah, so like that's the status at which Takayama has been placed.
Yeah,
essentially.
That's super impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So he got a second letter from two presidents then.
two presidents.
Nixon and Obama.
Massive amount of time between the two of them, but still
Still.
pretty freaking cool. But yeah, so his biggest contribution is probably still his recruitment of the best American to enter the sport, Akebono. But yeah, so like these guys all opened the door for Akebono, for Musashimaru, guys that put their own massive stamp on sumo, and we will cover in great detail in the near future here. But you mentioned Waka Ichiro, so our closing fun fact here, Musashimaru also has become a coach since retiring. And he currently has two Americans in his stable, which is Musashigawa Beya. He trains his own nephew, who goes by Musashi Kuni, and he trains Ichiro Young from Texas, who is better known as Waka Ichiro.
Awesome.
Yep, they're both in the same stable, and they're the only two active United States citizens.
Yeah, I believe Waka Ichiro still has Japanese citizenship because of his mother, and that's how they get past the two foreigner rule.
Exactly. He claims Nagasaki as his Sushin, which is where he's from. So he technically doesn't count as a foreigner. Since the 1990s or so, when there were all these Americans in sumo, there has been a rule that is each stable can have one foreigner.
Only one.
Right. Mm-hmm. Kind of to put a cap on, maybe to, shall we say, slow down the domination of foreign wrestlers, which due to Hakuho totally didn't work.
Yeah.
It did not work. But
Exactly.
The top three yokozuna were all from Mongolia before Kisano Sato.
Yeah, I think I remember reading up another reason for this foreigner rule is actually kind of culturally. If you bring a lot of people like into a stable at once, they it's hard for them to just kind of get acclimate as much into the sumo culture because they kind of talk with each other and they kind of want to do their own things. That's kind of one of the big reasons that they kind of said, like, if it's one person by themselves, they have to learn Japanese, they have to learn the sumo way. And that arguably is kind of the main reason for sumo, some people say, is like not to actually be doing sumo bouts, but actually to continue the sumo culture.
Exactly. Yeah, sumo is more than just a sport. And if I had a stable with 5 Americans and 5 Japanese guys, it'd very likely end up as a Japanese stable and an American stable. The Americans wouldn't necessarily interact as much as if each one was on their own in a fully Japanese stable.
Exactly. Cliques will form and such like that.
Right. So it totally makes sense, but this rule has been implemented since the American, I guess you'd say, revolution in the 1980s and 90s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's still, I still think it's not the best thing ever, but that exists.
It's something that we can certainly discuss at more length in the future, but in the meantime, I think why don't we call it a wrap on this one, and we will take a deeper study into Akebono and Musashimaru in the near future.
Sounds good. All right. If you want to rate us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, you can go out and give us some 5-star ratings. That would help us out a lot. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at Grand Sumo Breakdown.
You can check out our blog, grandsumobreakdown.wordpress.com. That's where we keep our fantasy sumo and our power rankings.
If you have any questions, comments, or corrections, drop us a line at grandsumobreakdown@gmail.com. If you want to go ahead and talk to us, give us a call at 805-613-7866. That's 805-613-SUMO.
And by all means, let us know what you think of the new Ryan List podcast. I think it might be something that we need to make stick.
It flowed.
It
It
worked
actually
pretty well.
worked.
Yeah, we're all happy and having a
Flarek,
good
you are
time.
an excellent bus driver.
I feel like I'm just so awake now.
Wait, hold it. Is that Ryan?
No, that would be my dog, Bubbles. I think she might be... Bubbles, would you like to join the podcast as our 4th member?
Look at those eyes. She's so hopeful.
I can't say no.
I can't either.
We better end the episode before it gets any worse.
Thank you for listening to Grand Sumo Breakdown. Until next time.
Throw your salt high.
And keep moving forward.